Okay, today I am joined by Julia Black. Julia, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Lucy, and really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while coming now. So you recently wrote a great new book, Lights on Learning, a parent's blueprint, for happy, curious, fulfilled kids. So I guess to kick things off, what spurred you to write this book and build the model suppose that you present within it, and then what is lights on learning as you frame it?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to write the book to download almost the thinking, the knowledge, the wisdom, and then sort of the knowing that I've developed over the past 15 years around how we can flourish as human beings, how we as parents can take an active role in ensuring our children know who they are, love who they are, um, understand what their natural gifts are, and can help them express it. And that's really kind of grown out of my own work as a mum, which started my daughter's now 21, but when she was 4, she started school, which we do here in the UK. They start school at 4. And I realized that on its own, school was never going to be enough. She was very bored very early on, and that was kind of coming out as anger and frustration. So really, I kind of started getting involved with her education, supporting it, working very closely with the school. And then that really snowballed through my work with the school. I then opened up a creative learning center, worked with thousands of children, and really begun to understand like how we learn, and how I guess how we move fluidly and dynamically in and out of engagements. And I began to realize that we have a mental, emotional, and physical and spiritual, if you want to go there, connection to learning. And when all of those are
Hmm.
connected and aligned, we can achieve extraordinary things. So the book for me really represented that sort of sense of I don't really want to leave this lifetime with it all in my head or my heart. And so I wanted to get that out so that parents all around the world could read it. Yeah, so that's really
Hmm.
the book. And also, I love telling stories, and I really, really loved the process of it, even though it was
Hmm.
challenging,
Hmm.
even though it was took a long time, even though I wanted it to be ready before it was ready. Um, I,
Mm.
yeah, I'm very, very proud to have got my body of work into a very sort of hopefully a very readable, cohesive form for parents.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've read through it, and it's very clear, very understandable, very easy to read, which is a good thing, and filled with lots of anecdotes, like you said, and examples of that you've drawn upon to build the framework within the book. So maybe let's just jump into that. What is lights on learning, or having your lights on versus having your lights off? I guess specifically within this context as a child.
Yeah, so when I started, when I had my creative learning center, I began to notice that children who were in school and maybe disengaged in my center came in, and very quickly we could engage them. And I remember I was speaking with a business strategist and said, like, I want to find a way of so that my team and us, we really know when we're getting it right. And he simply asked, well, when do you know when you're getting it right? And I said, well, you see it, you see it. It's like their lights have come on, you see it behind their eyes. And he was kind of, well, then it can be that simple, lights on, lights off. And it was in that moment, it was kind of like, if we could really have at the center of, our education systems or even within our homes, this metric almost that enabled us to understand that when we were feeling lights on, which is a state of being. So it's what we're thinking and what we're feeling, which causes us to act in a certain way. So being lights on is all about tuning into love, joy, hope, wonder, all of those emotions that help us, I guess, lose ourselves in the moment or feel one with the world around us. And equally, when we are being lights off, that's when we sort of slip into, anger, despair, apathy, frustration. So both of those states have a different kind of energetic frequency, really. But the exciting thing is, as I began to work with parents, when I closed my centres and I went online and I began working directly with parents to get this in the homes of as many families around the
Mm,
world, I really began to understand the importance of the lights off state as well as the lights on state. And this was a real turning
mm,
point for me, for my work, and for the families, because previously I'd been making the mistake, I guess, that many of us make as parents and educators and just human beings, which is to think, oh, we need to be lights on. Why aren't I happy? Why aren't I feeling joy? Why aren't I, able to be fulfilled? But actually, when we embrace lights off being normal, disengagement being normal, disconnection being normal, and it really taking us into an unsafe place, then everything changes. And actually, that becomes our signal that growth is on its way. And that's the game changer. So,
mm,
what I like to do, with my work and in the book, the first chapter really normalizes being lights off. It's a normal, natural, healthy response to being human. And I think somewhere along the line, we've problematized it, we've medicalized it, and especially for children, the children that, well, I guess like my daughter, she was neurotypical and a high achiever at a young age, but she still got bored and it impacted her mental well-being. So she was not learning as much
mm,
as she could, or a child who is neurodiverse and is really struggling to sit there either still or take the information in. They're also going to feel anxious and like this does not fit. Like they're going to want to move and get away from it. And I think when we normalize
mm,
that those are healthy reactions to being disempowered, which is what I think happens in our education system a lot, or even within our homes, then we can bring the power back into us. And that's ultimately what being lights
mm,
on or lights off means. It's about recognizing and having the self-awareness that I'm here at this particular moment. What do I need to do to calibrate to a place that I want to be? Um, so yeah,
mm.
hopefully that sort of gives a sort of an intro understanding.
Yeah. Is is there is there a sort of a middle ground in this model between these two states, or do you sort of characterize lights on as being anything generally positive, a generally positive state of doesn't have to be any particular form of intense motivation or engagement or happiness or joy or play. It's just sort of a relatively calm sort of baseline presence, right? And then lights off is when a child is expressing clear signs of some kind of negative state, emotional state. Is that is that is
Is
that
it
sort of the way you would
binary?
conceptualize it, or is there kind of a middle ground of just sort of steadiness between the two?
Yeah, so initially I saw it as binary, and because it was sort of an indicator. And then what we began doing in my community with parents was we started to track our lights on, lights off state. So we started to look and go, right, we over a 2 week period, we wanted to know, well, how often were we in lights on state of being and how often were we lights off? And what was really evident very, very early on was that it was too limiting being binary, and that actually it didn't feel great to be kind of saying, oh, I'm lights off today. Oh, I'm lights off today. Oh, I'm lights off today. But equally, it felt sometimes disingenuine to be saying, like, yay, I'm lights on, I'm lights on, like, I'm lights on. So when we started doing this work together as a group of parents and families, it became evident we needed a nuance, yeah, because it isn't binary. Our human state, our emotional state, our mental state isn't either on or off. And that's when I developed the lights on spectrum, which I designated 6 different signatures. So 3 lights off signatures, and 3 lights on signatures. The lights off ones being the sort of the lowest one is darkness. Then we sort of go up to dimness and glimmer. And then we move into the lights on signatures, glow, brilliance, and radiance. And when we started using this, as a community, it was a game changer because now we had a calibration tool. Now we didn't just have a metric that could allow us to say, oh, I'm feeling lights on or lights off, which people might think, well, it's obvious when I'm feeling that. Now what we had was a self-awareness tool to really go into the nuance of how we feel. And so that's been really exciting. So I have an online community of parents, and every month for 2 weeks, we kind of track openly, we sort of state where we are with it. And it's been, again, really powerful for us as parents to normalize the dips. But the exciting
Mm-hmm.
thing was that I discovered, Lucian, was that radiance, which is, I guess, my sort of um, the inner essence, I guess, of who we are, was something that many of
Mm.
us didn't feel connected to. It was almost like, I don't know
Mm.
what that feels like, and I don't know how to get there. And what we discovered, again, it was just beautiful to see the insights as I sort of led parents through this, was that actually it isn't a place to get to, it's a place within that we need to connect to and hold really hold really true. It's like our truth, I guess, our inner
Mm.
truth. And when we can do that, when we can connect to our radiance regardless and hold that, knowing it's in. So it's a bit like thinking, we know the sun is there. I'm here in England and it's a pretty grey day, as is very typical
Mm-hmm.
here. It's a white sky full of clouds, but I don't doubt the sun is there. Yeah, I know it's going to come out
Mm-hmm.
again. I know it's going to set this evening, and I know it's going to rise tomorrow. And when we can hold on to that belief that however we feel in this moment, even if we're in darkness, even if we are lights off, we know that our radiance is there. We know that our inner light is has not gone anywhere. It's just being covered over at the moment by some thought patterns, some emotional patterns, or a narrative that maybe we're telling ourselves. And that's really
Mm-hmm.
what Lights on Learning is about. It's about how do we change the narrative in those moments when we are lights off and come out of a reactive state and then really tune into being lights on and tuning into brilliance, which is kind of like, for me, it's my high creative zone, but holding that
Mm-hmm.
radiance, which again, many of us are finding is gentle, calm, serene, really feeling at peace with who we are and
Mm-hmm.
where we are at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And when we
Mm-hmm.
can use the tool, really simple tool, which is all about looking at our thinking and our feeling and where we feel it in our body, then we can accept that we move fluidly and dynamically through, I guess, a conscious awareness. And when old patterns, which
Mm-hmm.
are the lights off patterns, start to kick in, that's really when our subconscious patterns are kicking in with fear. So the other way to think of it is the
Mm-hmm.
lights off spectrum. Signatures are kind of infused with the fear and that sort of survival sort of
Mm-hmm.
state. And lights on signatures, that's when we're tuning into love and really, really feeling connected to who we are and the world around us. So yeah, I love the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's really nuanced and it can shift
Mm.
and change in any given moment. All we need is a trigger, right? And we
Yeah.
go lights off.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like the whole lights on, lights off framework is not so necessarily a like a methodology for action per se, or a process, but rather a perceptual model of how we understand our behavioral states in any sort of given moment, either for ourselves or those if we're parents as kids, and then at its core a philosophy around a personal philosophy to then be, I suppose in that case, perhaps to then be acted upon around what to then do about that, or how to perceive a given behavioral state, and the pathways one should take in terms of maybe self awareness or self reflection, or the connection of yourself to that state, say by not being disheartened, by being amotivated, apathetic, anxious, depressed, something along those lines, and likewise perhaps reveling or thinking a little more deeply about a positive state, as it may occur. The book isn't just about a philosophy or a perceptual model. It is also about how to engage, say, a lights on state, as you put it, and to move to that, because that's obviously a positive point, and that's what we want to move towards rather than the other one. Though, of course, the notion of a baseline and the normalcy there is something, and the okayness of that, the sufficiency of that is also important factor. But maybe before we get into the tools and those kinds of things, would you say that this is particularly, this whole approach, this whole bit of pedagogy basically, is particularly important for or useful to kids and children that are struggling in a typical schooling environment? Because this is quite heavily associated with schooling and learning, I suppose, the schooling context, which is much of the context of, either fortunately or unfortunately, of a young child's life. So would you say that this is particularly relevant to those kids that are struggling, and in some sense it probably must be, or is it equally applicable to any child regardless of their performance?
Yes, I think it's for all. I think this is what's exciting about it, is that actually this is about how do we flourish as human beings, however our brains are wired. And I think in terms of what I've seen happening, because I've worked with thousands of children who've been in school or home educated, and obviously I've got two of my own that I flex the system to work for them. What I would see is that when the children would become lights off, for example, and maybe that's kicking in as anxiety, maybe that's like not really wanting to go to school or talking negatively about school, and they're getting frustrated or angry. What I would see happen is the narrative around that child would go to that being a problem, and then almost sometimes an investigation of what is wrong. Like, why can't you sit still? Right? Because my brain is racing at 100 times and I can't slow it down. And what you're saying is boring. And why do I even need this? Right? There's 100 normal reasons as to why a child does not feel safe or calibrated or aligned in a school setting. Equally in a home ed setting, there's many home education families that also have children that don't want to learn. So I don't really see it as in school or out of school problem. But I do think it's for all children. And I've worked with the high achievers, who Angela Duckworth refers to often as being fragile perfects. It's like they've been able to achieve in the school system. They can jump those hurdles, they can get the grades. But anything outside of that, when they don't know what the answer is, when they don't necessarily know, how to please the teacher or how to get the grade or how to please the parents, then there's a sort of a crumbling of their self-worth and resilience. And equally for the children who really are sitting there day in, day out, just not being able to take in what the teacher is saying. Again, not for any problem, but just because they find it difficult to process someone speaking and retain that information and make sense of it and reprocess it. So it's equally important, because the high achievers, they might look like they're doing well in school, but I've found that actually when we really speak to them, is their mental well-being really flourishing? No, because what happens to us when we get bored, what happens to us when we feel disempowered, is we don't feel seen and heard or valued. And ultimately, at the core of being human, I think that's what we want. We're all wanting to feel loved. We're all wanting to feel seen and valued and heard and understood. And when that's taken away from you from such a young age, the normal, natural, healthy response is to shrink. That's how I see it. as a shrink and hide who you are. And then when we have a narrative in the home, which begins like, well, why can't you just go to school and get on with it like other children? Or even when children are high achievers, like really bigging them up, like elevating them, like, oh my goodness, you're so brilliant. Look at you, you're 3 years old and you're already reading, or you're 5 and you can do all of this. We're inadvertently creating a story around that child that, okay, this is wrong, or oh, this is the expectation. So I think it works for all children. And again, I'm excited by that because it stops this polarization of that the education system, schools can only work for certain children. And by placing the power in the individual, and then by working with parents to learn how to create this for themselves first, and to lead their family to learn how to sit with those uncomfortable lights off emotions. I don't like to think of them as negative because they can be very positive for our growth, but they're definitely uncomfortable. And when a parent knows how to do that for themselves, they can then also hold space for their child who is, in a lights off state. And if we go back to thinking when we are lights off, it's fear kicking in, right? Fear that what I'm saying isn't, worthy of anyone listening, fear of like, oh, I, saw that glance from someone, all the signals that we're picking up. Um, but when a parent knows how to hold space through love and the resonance of love for their children to be frustrated and angry and anxious in the moment, it's a game changer. So yeah, across the board, for me, this is every human being. If we know how to use our heart, our mind, and our body to work for us, and then we tune into the vision that we have for our lives, then it gets really exciting. And I think the key point here is, whilst I'm saying lights off is a normal, healthy state of being, what makes the difference, and I think I feel really strongly about, is how long we stay in it, right? We want to see the signal. We want to then use and interpret that to kind of look at, well, where is my thinking limiting me right now? And then we want to be able to shift and recalibrate back into, probably from a lights off space into like the glow, the entry level lights on signatures. Because it's the longer we stay lights off, the more um, we embed and more we create the narrative as to why do I feel like this. And I just love and coach the parents I work with to say, like, sometimes it doesn't really matter why we felt like this. Maybe we don't even need to search for a meaning. It's enough to know we do feel like this. Something in our external world or even internal world, it might be that we're just suddenly hungry, or, you know, but it's really a thought has crossed our mind that has switched us into the lights off neural networks of that have created those emotions that subdue us. And the key is recognizing that and not getting stuck there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Something that I appreciate, I think I particularly appreciate the book is about this book is the questions that it provokes around the education system and the nature of the education system, and how we should think about the appropriate way to perceive and treat children, but behavior in that time. So something that you do, and you were just talking about there, I think, was dissociating, or you just mentioned before, was dissociating disengagement in class, in particular from failure. And something that I've had a problem with upon sort of growing up, I suppose, and reflecting on the education system, is that implicit in that system is this presupposition that competence, capability, and ultimately the value of an individual is that is best appropriately metricized and determined through the frame of that system. That something like academic performance is the key indicator of ultimately, to just put it in very simple terms, of whether a child is doing good or bad in the world in a given, because it's, children are quite simple, their cognition's quite simple at that point, and so something like academic performance is a simple representation, good, bad, and that association with them internally then is, I am doing good, I am doing bad, I am good, I am bad. And so that the academic metric within the environment and the context of a classroom. Now, if you were to ask a teacher this, or you were to talk to them about it, they very likely they wouldn't explicitly say that is true. How they perform in grade 1 or 2 in terms of whatever it is they're trying to learn is an indicator of their value as a human being. But that's not the point. The point is that it is implicit, and that is what children are often. That's what life is as a young child, neurologically, psychologically, is implicit observation and learning. And so I think that's something that gets subliminally signaled to children, and that would then, let's say, emphasize, say, a lights off state, just because I didn't sit in class and face the front and pay attention to the teacher for 8 hours or 7 hours, whatever it is today. Like that's a normal state for some, say, a young boy to be in particular, which is, if you just take a second to stop and think about it, it's like, why would that be the case? Like, what evidence is there for that, right? So yeah, I guess that's just something I wanted to point out, is that, and I'm sure that's a perspective that you share. I think it comes across in the book, is perhaps there's a healthy skepticism about the presupposed validity of academic performance as an indicator of say worth within a child.
I really love your insights there around that. And how I see it is, I think you're spot on, right? We're still stuck in an education system that values the intellectual expression. And Lights on Learning, and also really the most innovative educational models around the world, is really now valuing the creative expression. So for me, Lights on Learning is all about what's the creative expression that only you, Lucian, can do, right? That's inside you, in your heart, that wants to be expressed using what I would call your natural born talents or gifts. And when I started working with thousands of children, so I'd have groups of children come to me at any one point, into my creative learning center. And what I began to see was that actually I ended up calling it their switch, because you would see it, when they're learning like this and using their hands, so it's full body embodied learning, their lights are on. And they're switched. And so some examples of that might be, my daughter is a wordsmith, my son is a digital wizard. We had the engineers, the makers, the poets, the performers, the scientists. And when we began to get them learning through their switch, the thing that really, when they were creatively expressing what they wanted to say, that might be intellectually, it might be emotionally, it might be creatively, but there's a tangible expression from my heart and my head coming out into some form, into the physical reality. Then we truly understand where that individual is as a learner. We have no understanding. If a child can just rote, memorize, and regurgitate something, it tells us nothing about them as a learner. It tells us nothing about how they think. It just simply now, in this day and age, tells us, okay, they can retain information, process it, and regurgitate it. They can play the system. But we're no longer really especially with AI, like, we do not, as human beings, need to retain knowledge now as much, right? We might want to, if that's how our brain is wired. My brain doesn't really retain knowledge unless it's part of my conceptual puzzle that I'm piecing together. So I can feel very much like someone might be talking to me. And if it's very knowledge based and I can't get a visual on it, it just washes over me. And whilst I understand the words they're saying, I can't really piece it together or even probably reflect back what they've just said. And so when we understand how we learn, and then when we realize we're in the creative era now, right, where actually what matters is what can I do? What can you do, Lucy? And what can we do together? I talk about this as our collaborative advantage. What could we do together if we came together to truly create something that only us as two individuals could create? And when you get children learning in a school environment or within a home or a community in that way, that's when ordinary human beings start to create something extraordinary because you begin to play to your strengths and you begin to realize and own your weaknesses. And this is now the shift away from the old school paradigm, which is, well, we need to plug those weaknesses and we're going to spend 14 years getting you to sit down. And if we need to medicate you, we will medicate you because that's the lesson you've got to learn. You've got to play by this, the rules. Instead of that, we just start to
It's
go,
not just
right, we have
learning, you have to
potentially
be obedient
14
as well.
years. Like, what a privilege. Exactly. You have to sit down and you have to look at the teacher and you have to not, and I'm not even, don't even care what you're curious about. And so if we look at it like that, I mean, I don't know if your generation learned Monty Python, but for me, it's like a Monty Python sketch, right? It's absurd that
Yeah.
you said the phrase like we're sitting children down for like up to 5 days a week, up to sometimes 8 hours a day, for I don't know, like 39 weeks of the year. It here is in the UK, and we're literally saying we don't care what you've got to what to say or what you think or what genius is inside you. Just sit down, please. And we're doing maths or English now. And it's so absurd in this day and age when we have AI that can just go, oh, you want to know about that? Zhung, there it is. Um, so I think it's exciting. I think we're in an exciting time. Again, I like to look not through bashing the old school model, but where can we evolve? And I think it's exciting because what it means is that it's our time as human beings to really understand how to use our own human technology to flourish using our creative energy and really our own sovereignty. But also, wow, imagine if we had whole school communities and families really being able to, you know, come together to learn in this way. Then we can look and go,
Yeah.
right, how do we solve some of the world's biggest problems, which, um, can bring a lot of fear into all of us, my generation, but equally, your generation. It's like, where's the world heading? And what we need right now are us as human beings to really pull together and be able to create solutions that make our world a better place, I guess.
Yeah, well, I might just bash on school quickly for another second,
Yeah.
but to get to
Go
get
for it,
to get at
Lucian.
a point that you make, because something that you point to or are leading towards, which I think is quite important and is missed in just so much of life, and just an understanding of what we are and how we work, why we are the way we are, eh, collectively but individually, is motivation, right? Is being in a motivated state. Like, so a common thing to maybe to ask or to look at or to in the education system. I remember this at school. It's like, are they a visual learner? Are they an audible learner? Are they any kind of certain learner? It's like it just sure, but that maybe that has some small effect, but it completely misses the point and the question behind it of why would a child even be interested in learning about that thing to begin with, right? Why would anyone be interested to be learning about a thing to begin with? Why would they want to do that, right? Why would you be motivated to do that? And maybe you're not at all. And if you're not motivated by that, then it doesn't matter whether you think they're a visual or an auditory learner or anything along those lines. If a child isn't stimulated in the sense that they're not motivated towards paying attention or undertaking a course of action that it has some kind of intrinsic value or reward stimulates both the reward and motivational systems within them, then or you've missed the point, and it's you're going to have friction there, or it's not going to work, right? And what you point to in the book is leaning into those motivated states. So, and doing things that for whatever reason have some kind of implicit value to a child and thus seem worthwhile to them to do and are meaningful and will then just get their dopaminergic system going, and that's why they like to do it, and so that's what they want to do. But I guess it raises a question, and perhaps this can maybe kind of top off our sort of abstract, broader analysis of things before moving on to maybe some more practical points and tools and everything, is in the face of indulging genuine motivated states, let's say, impulses, behaviors, desires, is it still important that things like reading, math, English, history, let's say at any given subject in school, that broadly equips a child to be prepared and ready for the plethora of sort of generality that faces them post school, to be sort of blanketedly prepared in some way? Is it most important that we prioritize those things, or whatever is most motivating the child when they're young? Because I've still not been able to come to a clear answer on that point, right? Like I would like to lean towards the latter, but it seems hard to completely do away with the former. And maybe you don't completely do away with the former. Maybe there's a middle ground there, but maybe it's also not necessary. Maybe you don't need to teach kids these things until they're a bit more cognitively developed anyway, right? So anyway, I'm interested on your thoughts on the matter. And because I guess one last point is that latter step, part of the good thing about school is that it's again kind of like a blanketed general institution that parents can send their kids to, and there's a system and a process in place that sort of supposedly generally purports to serve a function and work. But doing the other thing, the indulging and let's say committing more fully to whatever the particular motivations of the child are, not just stimulations, right? Like it's not just being like you might think of in the sense of when you have some sugary food or you go and play or you do a fun activity, that kind of quick fun stimulation, like a motivated course of action that has some deeper, more intrinsic feeling of reward to it. That would require a lot more genuine commitment and investment from parents too, right? Rather than passing the problem of childhood off onto the school. So yeah, given that things like reading, English and math, is it important that those things are still prioritized, or do we try to focus on whatever stimulates or motivates the child most?
I think it doesn't need to be either or. And so what I see with Lights on Learning is it's kind of like a layer that we can add on to whichever mode of education is currently existing. But here's what I've discovered and what I believe to be really true. Teaching knowledge, if it's not going in and it's pointless, like you were saying, like a child is sitting there like, I don't need to know this, I don't care about it, is kind of a waste of time. It's a waste of energy of the teachers, and teachers know this. They know they're sitting there with 30 children, probably 3/4 of them really not paying attention. But equally, we're so lucky as human beings that we have centuries of knowledge and wisdom to tune into. But for me, it really needs to start with that curiosity. When a child is curiosity opens up energy, like lights on energy, faster than anything else. I wonder what will happen if, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I wonder what this person thought about this 200 years ago. So curiosity can take us into the portals of knowledge, whether it's science, maths or history or whatever. And it will lead us deeper than any direct instruction ever will. And so what happens when you kind of come at it with curiosity and you look at your classroom full of children or your family, it's like, well, what are you curious to learn about? And that's one of the tools, that I use is a curiosity audit. What do you want to learn about? And what specifically do you want to learn about within that realm? And when we do this with children, it's not that they don't want to know anything or aren't interested in maths or English or science. It's that we give it context for why it's relevant. And so you talk about that motivation, and it's the relevancy. Why do I need to know this particular piece of knowledge right now? And the answer should not be because you're year two, it's spring term, and we're in week four. No, that is not sufficient. And I did some work with some teachers to really look at the curriculum, and it was year nine, so there'd be 13-year-olds, and it was a science curriculum. And I said, right, you know what needs to be covered, and they have it as a linear, we do this in, the spring term, autumn term, and certain weeks. But we knew what knowledge was required to be transferred, if we think of it like that. And we started applying the lights on learning lens on that. And it was really exciting because with my approach to learning or passion-led learning, it's all about, yeah, what are you curious about? And how can we get you creatively expressing what you're knowing and learning and the knowledge that, we've got at our fingertips. And what we were able to do is we were able to look at how so much deeper across the academic year a class of 13-year-olds could go in a science stream if it led with curiosity, if it led with creative expression. Because what would happen is you'd keep circling around the bits of knowledge and embed them further and further. But we'd also lock them in as going, oh, I remember that I needed that when I was doing this project. So the sticking power, I guess, of knowledge is much greater when we lead with curiosity in the heart. And the reason I don't think it has to be either or is because I guess I grew up with the old narrative of like, oh, I'm no good at maths. That was my narrative in school. And then when we had the Creative Learning Centre, parents wanted their children to, learn maths. And I just thought, well, how could we look at maths in a totally different way? And it turns out it's such a beautiful subject. It's kind of almost so key to who we are as human beings. When you start to look at maths as a creative expression in nature, the Fibonacci sequence, as you start to look at sacred geometry, as you start to understand that maths is about patterns and recognition, which our minds love. And so, again, with a creative expression or with that sort of idea that if we lead from curiosity, now we've got 30 kids in a class who not only are highly motivated to find out the bits of knowledge and apply the bits of knowledge because they're wanting to express it, but we also know that's going to stick much more. And when we look at models around the world that have project-led learning or real-world learning, the more real-world you can make it, the better. Then the depth of understanding, the depth of articulating the knowledge that they've processed, because it's no longer now about retaining the knowledge. I talk about it as going from knowledge to knowing. Yeah, it's that shift where, oh, that's never going to leave me now because I've got it locked away inside of me or filed away inside of me, where that piece of information that I needed at that particular time is constructed in this bit of puzzle. And that's what's really beautiful is that you begin to see children be much more articulate about the knowledge that they have, but you also see the creative expression of how they've applied that knowledge. Because we know in the real world, I don't really care how much knowledge you can retain, Lucy. And it's like, what can you do with it? That's what excites me. And I think that's what excites, the entrepreneurial world, the creative world, the scientific world. And that's the gap I think that we're trying to close now as parents and educators. How do we shift from very much an information, knowledge-based consumption model to one of a creative model where what we've got inside us can be expressed fully, taking the knowledge and the wisdom that we've gained to this point in history, and how can we unpick it? Maybe we need to unlearn it. Maybe some of it needs to be thrown out as, old wisdom. And how can we add and even disrupt our own thinking to bring different knowledge and different awareness and different knowing sort of into being? And I think the key here, where lights on can be very powerful, is it's really clear. We know when we use this metric which kids will not retain the knowledge, no matter how long you sit them down, no matter how much you try to get them to read something or retain it. We can just know by the fact if they declare they are lights off, it's not going in. Yeah. And so that's how we can bring the metric, we can bring the tools, even into the most traditional educational setting, which again, as an entrepreneur, I get excited because it means like, oh, actually, this could be applied in all scenarios. And then the other thing, which is really important, because when of the energy exchange between people and the brain to brain synchrony, if we also use the metric for the teachers, and we can see that actually that history teacher for the year 9 group, they're really lights off. They're going through the motions. They have bought into the narrative that this is just about going through the curriculum and doing my part of the job to make sure I've taught every single bit that these kids need to know, or filter out the bits they don't need to know because it's not in the exam and I know it's not in the exam. And so again, we can shine the spotlight on where are we as human beings almost corrupting or deviating the intention of education, which is, I like to think, noble and honorable and really exciting. Like how glorious that we as human beings have got this mind that can process information when we know how to use it, and this heart that can connect us to the world around us in such like you say, intrinsically motivated ways.
Yeah.
And if we're relying on the external rewards, well, we can forget it, because I can't remember any of the information I learned at school or
Yeah.
university, but I can remember, the maths that we studied when we were exploring it creatively in my center.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like what, and as well, like what external rewards, like a golden sticker, like that,
exactly. Who cares?
like that's sufficient or something. Yeah, just to wrap that bit up, it's the narrative is really important there, the story, and not just the internal narrative, right? Like, because motivation is fundamentally also a matter of value. Like implicit in that is value or values, valuing something being worthwhile, either because you just have some subliminal draw to that, or you have internally a narrative around why something is good, and perhaps that's associated with a goal or set of goals that you identify with, and all of these things, and that kind of construct a vision of the future with, and all such things that become particularly more relevant and necessary as one becomes more cognate and grows up. But it's certainly still important, like for a child, like nothing. When is it ever communicated really in a compelling narrative, either why you should want to know a thing or learn a thing? And if you're talking about, because it's to get a job when you grow up, like, yeah, like good luck that being something that sticks, that's not a value. Or if you, like you say, if you can make it interesting and tie it into some other more sort of, let's say, other values that are much more, say, present, or that's substrated in childhood, like to do with play or adventure or socialization or curiosity, although that's more sort of like an action, I guess, a process, yeah, and then you can build the curiosity. That's I think that's something that could definitely be done more, is building the narrative towards, if you want to try to get them to do things that they don't have any intrinsic motivation or need to do, then you need to construct a narrative sufficient to motivate them individually towards wanting to do a thing. And I guess, and then that's going to, some people you maybe just not going to be able to reach with it, right? Some people it's, and other people's you are, depending on the topic, and like perhaps, for example, how interested someone fundamentally is in abstraction versus the stimulus of just a real world action, like doing a thing like play or sports, or and all the things that go, the social element that goes with that. So unless you want to,
Can
yeah.
I come in here? Because you're making a really important point, and I want to give maybe a story that will speak to this. Is that for me, it's quite simple. It's asking that child, do they want to learn it? Right. And so, for example, if I give the example of there was Bryony, and she I talk about her story in the book. She's 6 years old, and she was starting to not want to go to school. So she was a high achiever. So all in purpose, intent to purpose, she could do it, but she was starting to feel anxious about going to school. And then lockdown happened, and her mum kind of knew that something was going on with her, and so kind of engaged me, and we worked together. And it turned out that what she was feeling was these lights off thoughts of like, I'm stupid and I can't write. Because so much of the time in school is spent handwriting, right? We've got to develop your handwriting, which again is questionable. Do we? Maybe. But do we want to? Is the better question. And so as soon as we knew that her thinking and her resistance point and her lights off thoughts were, I'm rubbish at writing, the obvious question, and the only question in my book really is, do you want to get better? Because if a child says no, right, then it's our agenda as the adult. But of course, whenever I've asked children, do you want to learn to write your numbers the right way? Or I'm thinking of a 7-year-old boy, that worked with, or, you know, what is it they want to do? Most often they will say yes. I do want to get better at something. And it was so transformative for Bryony at 6 years old, because now we knew she felt she was rubbish at writing. That was creating fear and anxiety, which meant she was not doing it. She was trying to avoid it by having tummy aches, losing her pencil, needing to go to the loo, anything to get out of that fear zone that felt very, very emotionally uncomfortable and painful. But we also now knew the motivation, right, that was there. I do want to get better. And now it's a process of then leading them through step by step, quite slowly sometimes, but it's like an exponential curve when we work in this way, because now they've got the reason why. And the reason can simply be, yes, I would love to write like my best friend, as it was in her case. And it was so transformative. But what we did is we went, well, what are you curious about to learn? Dinosaurs, right? Um, and she was a good reader. So she, consumed all these books on facts, and she was a great communicator. She loved to tell her younger brother all the facts about these various dinosaurs. And so then we said, well, why don't you make your own book? Right. So we got the tangible outcome for the creative expression that's fueled by her curiosity, that enables her to feel like, say yes or no. I'd love to do a book, which brings out her drawing that she loves to do, and now develops the one skill that she has said and agreed to that she wants to get better at. And so she produced this book led by her parent. And we asked her, like, does she want to write for 10 minutes, which is what they would do in school? 10 minutes, how much can you write? Or write 10 words, and it doesn't matter how long it takes. So again, a choice. And she said 10 words. And her mum led her through it and was able to see that when she got to 6 words, the anxiety started kicking in. I can't do it. I can't do it. The fear. And her mum was able to just guide her. Well, can you do one more word? I can do one more word. Okay. And then just one more word at a time got her to the 10 words, which then brings in a really important part of the puzzle for learning, which is the celebration, the post-struggle success. I did it. I did it. I wrote 10 words. And even though it was hard, and even though I wanted to give up, and even though I felt fearful and that I couldn't do it, I did.
And it was
And this, I
voluntary as
think, is
well,
the key.
which is a very
Sorry?
important. It was voluntary too, I think, which is a very important point.
Exactly, the ownership, right? She was in the driving seat. We weren't dragging her going, you've got to learn to write because, we get you'll get assessed on it, and you need to be up there. So when they're in the driving seat of their learning, all of these like little tiny pieces of what makes us incredible learners as human beings, they just slot into place. The celebration, which is hugely important, celebrating the micro wins. And in the book, I've got photos of her, the transformation of her writing in 6 months. Whenever I show any teacher that, they're like, wow, okay, you went from a very typical, well, went from anxiety, or she went from at 6, anxiety about writing that was presenting itself in the school, which was resulting in she's not doing as well as we would expect, right? Those kind of reports, she could be doing better, to her writing 10 words, knowing that she could, and she could sit through the anxiety, to creating this little book, to then setting her own goal that she wanted to write, as well as her best friend that she sat next to, who had this beautiful handwriting.
And there's the goal,
And the
right?
photo
Yeah.
is that book, a long page of very tiny, neat writing at 7 years old. And that's the power of what we can do. And I think when we limit it to what, going back to your point about, is there a prescribed set of knowledge that we should know as human beings? It's like, oh, the ceiling is so low when we just look at it as transfer of knowledge and a jumping of hurdles. Because, oh my goodness, what children can do when we learn in this way, and when we unlock that intrinsic motivation, that curiosity, and use our lights on and lights off kind of signatures, it's off, it's out, it's off the scale. And that is when we know that children, young people, or adults are locked into the love of who they are. And I remember my son coming up at 9 and going, Mum, I'm loving being me right now. And for me, ultimately, that should be the job of us as parents and educators. Do you love who you are? Right. And do you love what you can do? And do you know why you've come here to this world to express? And, or if you don't know, what about getting curious and discovering it? Because surely that's what life is about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think two of the key takeaways for me there was the voluntary component, and then the goal and the setting of a goal, right? Like whenever the people that, well, I observe, and there's plenty of literature on this as well, when you feel like you're in control of your time, and in some sense control of what you're doing and therefore where you're going, which is effectively the same thing as saying voluntary. It's maybe not exactly the same, but it may as well be, to say that you are doing something voluntarily. It is your choice. Those are, you feel like you haven't necessarily been forced into it by some external factor, either an individual or just economic circumstance, right? Or social circumstance. That's when people are the most at peace and comfortable and, as you would call it, in a lights on state. And then you combine that with a goal, well, then you've got something to aim at, to work to, that you can observe yourself completing, and that is fundamentally rewarding. And then you can complete it, and that is also rewarding, though in a slightly different manner. And that again, those people that say voluntarily choose to go down a path of their own, let's say to pursue a goal of their own, generally are the most motivated and the most engaged and the happiest. Now that can be hard to find, right? In say this world of constraints and circumstance, to feel like you are in control of whatever it is you're doing and pursuing goals that you've set. But again, that comes back to the narrative and your values, the value-built narrative of your time and your action. Like that was a little micro narrative that girl, whose name I've forgotten, has was constructed there, right? It was her narrative, a narrative about what she wanted to do and why, right? And
Yeah.
that she was then able to fulfill, and that was what was so rewarding. And then once you're on a motivated, rewarding path, well, that's when you learn the most, and that's when you also participate the most. And then obviously that's what then part why she went on to improve, because the narrative was different, and the goal was different. Like, what the goal typically and otherwise in school is just to not get a bad grade in many ways, and that's not a very, it's just not the, yeah, like what does that grip on? Nothing. It doesn't grip it grips on a fear of failure. That's what it grips on, rather than a desire to achieve something intrinsically valued. So
Yeah, and I
perhaps,
think
yeah.
the narrative, I think, is really important. And I guess that's what I see us as doing as humans. Like, we're writing our own story, right, through life. And what's exciting is that narrative can be different depending on our emotional and mental state. So if we are in lights off signatures and a state of being, so we're feeling more disconnected, more disengaged, more hopeless, maybe we're sort of descended into despair or apathy or something, the narrative available to us at that time is going to be very different than when we are lights on and feeling hope and, love and joy. And again, it's powerful when you realize that, because now you can make that conscious choice. I'm writing my narrative from a lights on vision, right? Which means that when I go lights off, I don't make any key decisions that would take the narrative of my life, my vision of where I'm heading, off track. But I use it to fuel the vision that I'm holding for where I want to go. And I think that's really important in the self-awareness work with the people I work with and children. Is once you realize, oh, I'm in the driving seat, I own my narrative, right? And that can feel different in different times. But when I'm aware that when I'm almost trashing the vision that I've got for my life because of my internal narrative is becoming negative or emotionally charged with fear, anger, and frustration, then I don't need to I can sit with it and I can see it, but then I can shift it. And ultimately, I think that is what I has been the biggest gift for me, as an entrepreneur, which is like, yeah, I'm on a quest that is not easy, and I have to fail over and over again. And sometimes I feel like I don't want to have to get up again. I don't want to have to get it wrong. I don't want to have to make decisions that may not work, but I have to then listen to my heart and tune into. But I'm on this adventure and I've committed to it. And I'm just going to take a little pause here to recalibrate, but I'm definitely not going to make the decision, however tempting it is in that lights off moment, to close my business or to stop doing what I'm doing. So the narrative, like you say, that we write for ourselves through our thought patterns, through our emotional resonance, is absolutely key to the life that we live. And I think we're seeing that play out around the world at the moment, and I think for your generation and my children's generation, I think it's never been more important, because the old school narrative does not exist anymore. We don't have
we
jobs for life.
we don't have bigger, broader cultural or religious narratives to inform our own, to build our
Yeah.
identities, and to inform who we are, what we do, what to think about the world, how to map out our world and our place in it, which is that's a common, very fascinating theme these days, because we like, life is a narrative. We perceive the world as a narrative, as effectively a story. We don't see facts, right? Like, we don't just perceive facts, objects, things. We perceive the technical term, let's say affordances, for example, or the associations, the relationships that things have to each other, and the meanings that they intrinsically have, right? And so it's all part of a model that we build about our world that starts at a very material, atomized point, and then it becomes very broad and abstract. Perhaps then, would you say that if you were to that the most readily implementable thing that requires the least structural change, either at home or in the education system, is is the generation of narratives and the provision or assistance in generating better narratives for kids by teachers, by parents. That's a maybe the advice or the thing that can be most readily done here, that can be drawn, the lesson that can be drawn out of this. Though maybe there's a catch point, because for you to enable or assist in the construction of someone else's narrative, that might be hard if you yourself do not have a narrative, right? Or a particularly compelling narrative, or if your narrative is one clouded by cynicism. Now, just looking back into my primary school days, there are plenty of teachers that I could think of that were not particularly, would not have looked fondly upon the idea of necessarily trying to foster an optimistic, individualistic narrative within kids, purely because of the state of their own one, right? But that
100%.
that dilemma aside, perhaps the narrative point is, would you say that's perhaps the easiest, most implementable thing to take away from this?
Yeah, I think, and what you're saying there is about breaking the generational legacy of, me as a parent passing on my narrative, right? Which, I've unpicked my own narrative. Oh, I'm not the high flyer, or I'm not the high achiever. It's the looking at that and deconstructing that, not passing on our own narratives. So really, this is for children to um, be able to write their own stories. It has to start with us as the adults around them, whether you're a teacher, an educator, a community worker. Let's get our own narrative in check and in place first, because that is when we bring in self-awareness. That is when we see and listen to ourselves. That's when you've talked a lot about values. That's when we really look at, well, what are my values? If my values as an educator are to foster the brilliance of other people, maybe I have to change my narrative that my hands are tied and I have to do it like this. Do you? There's plenty of examples of teachers who are saying, no, that's not my narrative. I refuse to dim the lights of these children. I'm going to find out what each of them is curious about, where their brilliance lies. And we're going to cover the same knowledge over time. We're just going to do it in this different way. So I think right now there's needed to be a shift from victimhood, well, there's nothing I can do, to empowerment. Well, there's something I can do and it begins with me. And when we shift to that, what children will see is they will see the adults around them making choices that are aligned with their values, that create a narrative of hope. I know you're fascinated and writing a lot about hope, and that really allow us to resonate with love and joy and awe and wonder about what it means to be human. And so it has to start with the adults around, changing the narrative, even about what it means when a kid can't sit still in school, or what it means if a child, sometimes it's even they got 7 out of 10 and a parent isn't happy, right, for spellings. Or what are the narratives that are so old school, it's such an old school paradigm that we just need to break free from now. And it has to start with the adults around the children, because the narratives, as we've explored, are based on what we think to be true about ourselves and our place in the world around us. And what we think creates our emotions, and that thinking and feeling is their state of being, whether we are lights on state or lights off state. And it's that determines the choices we make and how we act and show up in the world, and therefore the outcomes that we get. So yes, I think really bringing it down to a very beautiful way that you have, which is, let's be sure the narrative we're writing for us as parents and educators and adults empowers anyone around us. And then let us really be clear that we are facilitating children and young people to write their narrative that allows them to have hope and joy and
Hmm.
love and wonder, but also making them really aware. With that, when we really lock into what we want to do in life, oh my
Hmm.
goodness, there's going to be fear. And
Hmm.
perhaps even more so, right?
Hmm.
Because we are going to want to, I talk about our heart dreaming bigger than our head is ready for. When we
Hmm.
lock into a quest, when we take on a challenge because we know where we want to go, we will hit resistance, we will not have the answers, and we will have to keep going no matter what.
Hmm.
And when we really see that our narrative, I guess it's the hero's journey, right? We're going to face the challenge. It's what we do
Hmm.
at the moment that we face the challenge that really determines who we are
Hmm.
and who we're being
Hmm.
and what our contribution to the world around us is
Hmm.
in that moment, but also in our lifetime.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I would think that you say adults, the place to start is with the change in the narrative in the adults, and that being educators and parents, though I suspect perhaps parents being the forefront, the change
Mm.
and the change in their narrative being that, or at least one change, um, at least a willingness for flexibility, is the assessed judgment that, again, performance at school is an indicator of somehow of their child's performance and or how good they're doing, and thus to move away from that and to move away from that as perhaps necessarily without them realizing it, being in a source of pride or reward to them as a signal that they are being good parents, right? And move because that itself
Yeah,
is a narrative
totally.
structure. So perhaps letting go of that as being a signal in that way, and and being willing to move more towards a a perception or just a judgment that passion and motivation outside of that framework is equally valued and something that they can equally take pride in themselves, or more so even in terms of how they are facilitating their child's passions and motivations. But starting with the parent there, I would say, in particular.
Yeah, and the biggest fear that that we have as parents, and I coach people down to this. It's almost the worst case scenario. It always comes up as like I fear I'm not a good parent. I feel I'm
Hmm.
letting them down. And unfortunately, when disengagement or disconnection or mental ill health kicks in a child, that fear comes center stage. And then
Hmm.
it kicks in like, what can I do? I've got to do everything. But it's not from an energy of certainty, it's from an energy of panic. And
Hmm.
so, where I coach parents is just like, yeah, we have to we have to admit we will let our children down at some point because we are human. And
Hmm.
that's what relationships are. But as soon as you can let that go and not have to be the perfect parent, which is a narrative, right? Then you can have a much more open dialogue. And it's really difficult sometimes as a parent to really listen, active listening to your children. I've done it with my two, with my daughter in particular, to hear about what she needs to say to me about the things that
Hmm.
maybe where, um, I have got it wrong.
Hmm.
But I think that's really important for us as
And to pick up
parents
on their
to be
physical
able
cues
to
as
hear
well.
that. Yeah, exactly. And when we acknowledge that, yeah, ultimately, as parents, our biggest fear is we muck it up, we get it wrong, we let them down, then we are aware that narrative is there. And now we can be proactive to making sure that doesn't happen, not with conscious awareness. If we're not aware of it, we're kind of doing it anyway. But once we're consciously aware, we can kind of go, right, I need to be more open. I need to be more forgiving, more accepting. And like you talked about, I need to have compassionate energy and not judgment energy. And actually, where am I seeing my children as trophies? And that if they aren't performing well at school, it says something about me. Or if they're refusing to go to school, it says something about me. Um, and when we really take that honest look at ourselves, which is really what Lights On Learning is all about, or being lights on, then that's when we shift, I think, the future for our children, and ultimately for the future direction of travel for us as human beings.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it it raises the point of having two questions perhaps that can sit side by side in, let's say, a failure scenario, if you want to call it that, and that is there something wrong with my child, or is there something wrong with the system that my child's in? You don't just jump to the former, right? Maybe you
Yeah.
give equal weight to the latter. And this actually brings me back to a point that I almost missed asking, that I think is a very important one, and that and is particularly more important now in this day and age, with the onset of things like safetyism, and in parenting in particular. Like, what advice would you give to parents who struggle with letting their children experience failure?
Wow, I mean, it, it's probably the biggest gift you can give them, to allow them to fail, to allow them to make mistakes, to allow them to be imperfectly human. And I feel really, for me, that was the biggest gift my parents gave me. That I learned that failure over and over again did not mean I wasn't loved. And that actually, no matter how many times I fell over or couldn't do something or failed, that secure base was still there. And I just think, for parents, the work there is, look at your own fear of failure, look at your own narrative around that, and then decide, how has it served you? Right? Have you become a fragile perfect, a high achieving fragile perfect? Or have you never pursued your dreams because you believe that you would never, you would fail to get there? So you give up. What's your own narrative around the fear of failure? And then just ask yourself, do I want my children to have that? Because behind the fear of failure is the third question to ask ourselves, which is, as parents, is, you said, what is wrong with my child? What is wrong with the system they're in? But it's also, well, what is wrong with me? And when we trail down to, as human beings, actually, we're all have automated in, something is wrong with me. It must be, because otherwise I would know what to do for my child and I would lead them to there. Once you can trail back to that, and then really decide and get all of your own lights off thinking out on paper, which is really important, you can ask yourself, do I want my child to take on this narrative? And that, for me, has been the key moment, that every parent, when they decide, no, I do not want to pass this thinking on, I do not want to pass this, like this legacy of fearing failure, of being, a fragile perfect or someone who doesn't believe in themselves, then things begin to shift massively quickly for the children in that family. And I call it the lights on effect. And the science behind it is like brain to brain synchrony. When you are resonating with love for yourself, yeah, and then that the people around you begin to entrain to that. Whereas if you are absolutely having your own sense of, I'm getting it wrong, there's something wrong with me, I'm rubbish, I'm a rubbish mum, for example, then that that is going to be subliminally picked up for sure, because it changes how we act, and we become much more controlling, and we try to fix something that maybe is not our problem to fix. And the shift here is from micromanaging to leadership. So, yeah, I think to create a culture in our homes where our children feel safe to explore, experiment, and get it wrong, and not be perfect, or not have to perform, in a certain way to receive love or affirmation, is definitely the biggest gift that we can give as parents.
And the tough love, in a sense, so that the more tough love you do, the less tough love you need, right? In some ways, right? Like, one of the great things about failure, or being allowed to fail, or being simply confronted with the consequences or the reality of your failure, in whatever sense, it doesn't have to be academic, it can just be in any kind of part of life, is that it is very motivating in making you not want to fail again, right? Or to not want to repeat that, which not only to be motivated to not want to fail, to learn how to then not fail, and to avoid that situation to begin with, or again, which is
Yeah, or
all.
to learn how to fail forward is the expression, to learn
Yeah.
how to, what do I learn from it? So I love this saying that, you make a mistake once, it's a mistake. Twice, okay, maybe it's still a mistake. The third time you make that same mistake, now it's a choice.
Hmm.
And I think that's that when we see failure as it's so intrinsic to learning, then
Hmm.
it's kind of how do I learn from this so that I don't repeat it again? And
Hmm.
I can fail in different ways. I can
Hmm.
make,
Hmm.
more glorious mistakes. I can learn the next lesson. So I
Yeah.
think it's a it's re it's re defining our relationship with failure as inevitable, healthy, and
Yeah.
oh my goodness, let's learn from it so that we don't keep repeating it through
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. And to not be scared of it, because failure is around every corner, right? In life, it is in almost every single thing that
Yeah,
you may think to do, or context you be in. There is in some way the potential for some kind of failure, whether it's social, whether it's performative in some sense. um, and if you are intrinsically, fundamentally afraid of failure, well then that's your life is characterized by anxiety at that point, and you're behaviorally inhibited, and that's the worst place you can effectively be in, as an individual. So yeah, failing and letting your child fail in the most productive way possible is I say we can agree that it's a very important thing to be able to do. It's a very hard thing. It's a very scary thing,
yeah,
right? And I can
really
imagine
scary.
for a parent in particular, but very necessary. I know I can actively think back to points where I have been confronted with something that I've done wrong or bad that were very incredibly excruciating, painful for me at the time,
Mm.
but my parents just pushed through with it, um, and it was good that they did. And where I've then failed or done something, a situation hasn't gone the way I've wanted to, and
Mm.
I've thought that's not going to happen again, right? Like,
Yeah.
and instead taking sort of the taking that into your own
Lesson.
hands, right?
Yeah.
Rather than letting it own you, which is perhaps one of the most valuable character traits you can have. To
Yeah.
not be
And
afraid
that's
to
where the
fail.
resilience, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the resilience kicks in. And that's when you are, for me, a true learner. When you accept that failure is inevitable, where you're heading because you're one is ambitious, so we're on a quest to explore all that we can be in this lifetime. We've just yeah, we've got to find our way to cope and deal with that emotional pain that comes because it is emotional pain.
Hmm.
It's very, very uncomfortable when we fail or get things wrong. But
Yeah.
when we realize that, can I sit in that? Yes, I can. I might feel unsafe momentarily, but actually I can sit in it and I can see it for what it is and I can process it and then I can let it go. That's when we can really use the lessons from failure
Hmm.
to learn and grow and flourish, really.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Julia, I know we're coming to our time, and so I just wanted to ask, to wrap things up, was there any distilled piece of wisdom, any takeaways for either young people, educators, parents, anything that you'd like to finish with?
I think the main thing is, and just tuning into, what you talk about hope is um, I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. And
Hmm.
I really truly own that if I want to see a future that not only works for my children, but also potentially my grandchildren, then it does start with me. Whatever age you are, it starts with us, how we show up. And that starts with really becoming aware of what you're thinking and feeling in any given moment and taking full ownership of that. And then
Mm.
keeping the narrative that we've been talking about, an internal narrative that you can rewrite and edit on the fly, as opposed to getting caught up in an external narrative that disempowers us. And I think if we can do that as human beings, the more of us that raise our awareness, the more of us that take ownership of how we show up individually, so that impacts those around us. And then we can start to collaborate. I feel very hopeful that that we can move through what feels like very, very turbulent, sort of destructive times to one that is a better, more enlightened paradigm.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I personally hope that your book makes its way into more parents and more educators' hands. I think that would be very helpful for all of us going forward, and particularly the younger generations. They've got a lot of problems that they've got
Yeah.
to face, not least of which is just the education system itself and the fact of being alive. But now the dilemma of technology and social media and phones and all these things. And again, the name of that book was Lights on Learning: A Parent's Blueprint for Happy, Curious, Fulfilled Kids, which you can find on Amazon. I think it's probably the easiest place to find it. And yeah, fantastic conversation, Julia. Really, really enjoyed it. Really, really interesting, and I think important stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucian. I've really enjoyed it.
Cool, great.